don't think it would be Vikings. It certainly wouldn't be American natives would do it, because it doesn't fit any pattern of the American natives. I can say that because part of my family is American native, and we've talked about their rich history and all this stuff. Not any mention of anything like this. So I find it kind of unique. And, even in like Peru, there's places like on your property, in Mexico. And again, British Columbia has a lot of it. It's really interesting. I don't think it was to protect from warriors or anything like that. I don't know if it was dividing property, some of this, what it is, or if it was for, animals or whatever. I find it so unique, and what you have is so special. And out of curiosity, how many people come and look at it per year?
Yeah, it's approximately, I'm going to say about 30,000. This year's been a little bit better. It's probably above that. Last year, our 60th anniversary, for some reason, the weather, and it was just a really slow year. It was kind of disappointing on our 60th anniversary, and the year before was okay. That big one we had, and it was like, oh, this is a slow year. But we talked to some other places in New England, museums and attractions and stuff, and they were down quite a bit. One place was actually well-known around the world, and down in Massachusetts, in Plymouth area, and they were down quite a bit for a while there, and I'm like, whoa, so, but we've had a lot of nice TV coverage this year from Travel Channel, History Channel, a lot of nice radio shows, and it seems like people are just out and they're, spending a little more money, so, but I think Stonehenge, to put it in perspective, gets about 1 million people a year, so 30,000, but we have been, it seems like this year it's been going in a good direction, more people, more interest, the people seem to come down, and we are thinning out the woods up there. We have a big project coming up. A forest management project. It will take about 6 or 7 weeks. We're going to open up the alignments more. We're going to open up a couple alignments that we never opened up since we began in 1967 with the astronomical. And the moon goes through an 18-and-a-half-year cycle. And Stonehenge has that. A place like Cahokia Mound State Park in Illinois, one of the biggest pyramid complexes, in the world. I've been to that. It had a wooden circle set up for the quarter days. I think the cross quarter days, and I believe lunar. Some of the mounds out in Ohio, and Ohio had about 10,000 mounds, prehistoric mounds that are just amazing. Some of them are geometrically shaped, because they have pyramidal shape, and then they have the conical shape, which were burial. But the geometrically shaped one, I think in Newark, is aligned with the moon too. So there's a fascination with the moon and the sun too. And so we're going to open up these 4 different avenues so we can actually watch the next lunar major standstill, they call it, in the year 2025. And if the weather's good and we get the trees cleared properly, we'll probably see the first time, that event take place at our site, because we just never had time to open up all the alignments. There's up to like several hundred feet of trees, and it's just a lot of work. But we're going to do that in November, I think. November into December this year. So.
Oh, wow. How many acres is this that you have?
Yeah, it's about it's about 110 acres. It's pretty much the whole hill. But we think it's part of a much broader, construction across the landscape. There's a site in North Stonington, Connecticut, and there's 8,000 features. A feature can be a chamber or a standing stone, a monolith. It can be what we call a cairn, which is a pile of rocks. Some of the cairns had chambers inside of them, and so there's just, thousands of these sites, across the landscape, and I apologize for that. But, so that's a site like North Stonington is actually considered one site, and our site is considered one site, but it has many, many different features in it. So, it's 35,000 acres in that town of structures, basically.
Oh, wow. Now, on your property, did it look like it was like a group of people lived on it, too, besides all this stuff at one point?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, that archaeologist has actually been looking. We found a workshop area about 1991. It's a workshop area where they would be making manufacturing tools, and because they would live in that area. And it wasn't on the main site, and it wasn't in the... There's an area of about 20 acres that is surrounded by a wall. And this wall, as you were mentioning the walls, not being defensive and what were their purpose, a few minutes ago, This wall may have designated this area as a ritual area. We don't think it was a domicile or habitat. Usually you find their middens, the trash pits. Our site's pretty clean. It's like a church, It's kept fairly clean. I mean, there are stone tools and artifacts that were found from that time period. But she's been looking on the lower parts of the hill, and in 1992, I think it was, she actually found that workshop. And a material that came from Boston, about 30 miles just from here, just a few miles north of Boston. I think it was rhyolite. She identified its source. And she said, yeah, this is a workshop. They imported the stone from about 30 miles away, and they're making tools here. So her whole thing in the last 2 years is actually trying to find, where they were living. And they would have lived in probably something made out of hide, wood, or bark, something perishable. And, it's very hard to find that after 4,000 years, of course. You can find the fire pits and you can find a few stone tools. It was before ceramics, at that time period. So we are looking for that. Yeah, definitely. And that in Europe is a problem too. All those monuments, you see 50,000 of them, most of them, almost all of them, with a couple exceptions, were not living places. They were like Stonehenge, a tomb, a temple, and a monument. And archaeologists, they don't like that because they like to find where they live because it has so much more material they can examine, and they can date, and they are starting to find that, and they're finding it by LiDAR over in Europe and here too, in the States. Worldview 3 satellite, ground penetration radar, as you mentioned earlier, they are starting to find some of the habitat sites. And from that, they can, learn a lot more about the culture and hopefully find bones and stuff like that, if they can, to identify the people.
Interesting. Now, have they found any metals like, brass or anything like that?
Yeah, actually, Mr. Goodwin back in the 30s, his book came out in 1946. He wrote 4 books. The book was called The Ruins of Great Ireland and New England. And when he came, he first thought in 1936 when he came to the site, it was a Viking settlement. And as he started having a crew clear off all the brush and debris that covered everything, it didn't take the shape of a Viking settlement whatsoever. But it did remind him of Irish Chaldean monks again. And, again, the monks would have been here before the Vikings, probably over 1,000 years ago, according to his theory. And he found about 13 other sites in New England. And today, as I mentioned, we know about 800. So he died in 1950 still believing that this site was Irish Chaldean monk monastery. By the Chaldean monks were kind of a hybrid pagan Christian transitional period, I guess. He does show a couple of daggers, not only from our site. They look bronze, actually. And one of them, there's a couple of different metal tools, and they're missing today. They're in this book. We have nice, pretty pictures of them, black and white pictures. And there's one from, I think, Merrimack Port, Mass, about 20 miles away, and it was another one of these daggers, like a bronze dagger. And I don't know the location of that. So he did find a few interesting pieces of metal. Our site, 4,000 years old, would have been during the time of the Bronze Age, but it still would have been kind of rare and expensive, So stone tools would have still been used, especially by masons that, knew the trade, because on the edge of these stones, it looks like it was Stone Age technology, again, not metal tooling, If they had any metal tools at all, there probably have been a few and far between because of the expense of them. And that's what Goodwin, I think, found. And 80 years later, we just don't know where some of these things went. There's actually hundreds of artifacts that are missing today from the site, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, that unfortunately happens. Do you get much vandalism at all during, the spring and summer and all that stuff?
Well, it's been pretty, knock on wood, we haven't really had too much. We live on one side of the property. We bought a couple of acres back in 1985. And my dad was living 10 years ago. He died, but he was living on the north side. And the neighbors have been pretty good with us, and the neighborhood kind of surrounds the property. And we did have problems, I think in the 60s when I was a kid, I remember hearing of vandalism of signs, people breaking into the visitor center. And we haven't really had too much again in the last, dozen or, 2 dozen years, which is good, just minor little things, but nobody's gone up there and trashed the place or tried to knock down. I mean, the rocks are pretty solid, but you can still cause damage to them, and graffiti too, that kind of thing has happened in the past. That's one thing we've seen up there. People would go up there and write on the stones, like, great,
Yeah.
That's not good. That's defacing it, But yeah, so I'd say most people are good. It's always, one person it takes to, make a mess. But, so we've been lucky that way, I think.
Well, have you ever went out there, like where you're talking about opening up another area which hasn't been open? Have you gone around there with metal detectors or anything like that to see if you find any objects at all?
Yeah, we'll do that. Actually, I got about 3 or 4 of them at the building, collection of my dad's and my uncles. They were really into that. So I think ground penetration is better, but metal detectors good. I mean, they kind of because they're not that expensive and they're pretty easy to use. I've taken one up on the site to look for some tools that I lost when I was painting. I mentioned there's a chain link fence that goes around the site that was put up in 1937. It's still there. It's in really good shape. It was put there by the forest researcher to protect the site. While I was painting it 2 years ago, I lost some stuff up, and I found the thing kept going off everywhere up there. I'm like, what is this? What is all this metal here? So I didn't do any digging and all, but I mentioned it to our archaeologists. It could be something, historic, I would imagine, but I don't know why, but I couldn't find my tools because it just went off every minute. Everywhere I was going with this metal detector, I couldn't find any of my stuff, but it definitely goes up. Yeah, we're going to manage the forest. We're going to thin the whole thing out, and we've been working on that for 14 months, and we're going to open up all the walls so you can see some of the really cool features and let people go further out. I think we let people cover about 15 acres when they go on a tour today. It takes about 45 minutes to an hour, but we're going to open up some of the other trails. We have snowshoe trails that go way out, and the walls just cover the whole hill. And some of these walls, they have a serpent-like shape to them, like a snake, and they have like a head, a body, and a tail.
Interesting.
The body can undulate vertically or horizontally, and they can run from 30 feet up to a couple hundred feet. But we found one that starts at a chamber called the Watch House, and we never noticed behind it the wall undulates right behind it, and the first hump is actually a November 1st cross-quarter day. And the ancient Celts, and again over in this country, Mesa Verde, I think it was, we were just out there last week, has the cross-quarter day. And for people that don't know, the quarter days are the seasons, and the cross-quarter days are days in between, such as November 1st, August 1st, May 1st, and what else did I miss on that? But it's the beginning of each season, basically. So like May Day is the beginning of summer. When you get to the summer solstice, it will be the midsummer solstice. August 1st would be the beginning of fall. September 23rd, like today, and actually today we had the alignment today, is kind of the first day of fall, but it's really kind of mid-season. And November 1st would be the beginning of winter, the end of fall, and then winter solstice, So these were very important to the ancient Celts as well as other people. That first hump is that November 1st. The structure itself is actually a February 1st alignment. The head of the serpent is a big boulder. It looks like a head of a serpent, and then the wall undulates, and it goes around 2,550 feet. It comes back in front of itself. It does another beautiful hump-like twist, 90-degree twist with a pointed tail, and we never noticed that. We never put 2 and 2 together. We always knew there was a hump in front of the watch house, but we didn't put it into the whole picture, basically, the big picture. It looks like it's a serpent biting its tail. It's called the Ouroboros. And the Greeks, Egyptians, and people around the world, the Ouroboros to some people, represented the infinity, And I think serpent can represent sexuality. It can represent like Adam and Eve, in the Bible, St. Patty driving out the serpent worship. The Egyptians had the cobra. But at our side, I think that wall is actually protection. And in Spain, it's been in the news recently, due to the bad drought, they just found another megalithic complex. They call it Spanish Stonehenge now. It has artwork of the serpent. And what they say is that serpent, again, was protecting that site. It was a protector. I think that goes around 2,550 feet. It wraps around. It touches every astronomical foresight. When you look at an astronomical alignment, you have to have a back sight and a foresight. The foresight is the stone that you're looking at the sun, moon, or stars sitting or rising over. And the back sight is where you're standing. You have to have 2 points to make an alignment plus the object. And that serpent wall touches every one of those over 2,500 feet, and then it bites its tail. And we have actually 3 Ouroboros, we think, at our site now. 12 serpents, we think.
That is interesting. I don't even know how they have the technology to, lay that out. I mean, even today, to make anything straight and accurate and go in just shapes like that, it takes a lot of sophisticated equipment to do it. And it figures 4,000, 7,000 years ago, I just don't see how they had the technology without some type of help. But I find it so interesting. When we get back, Dennis, I got to ask you one question. Somebody emailed me. They didn't text me. They could have gone on one of the apps and text me, but they want to know if you see anything strange ever there towards dusk, like orbs or stuff like that. Anyway, we're going to be back in 2.5 minutes. You're listening to, well, me, Gary, on Night Dreams Talk Radio. Our guest tonight is Dennis Stone. We're talking about American Stonehenge. We'll be back in 2.